Shalom, everyone. You know what's the most dreadful thing to stand up here? It's looking at yourself and that TV back there. um, but anyway, how's everyone? You all doing well? You all filled with God's joy? I hope you all are, because I certainly feel that way, because God has been faithful, God has been good throughout our lives. And realize it or not, this is like the first week of December already. And then I just can't believe 2022 is over. Well, it's not technically over, but it's almost over. And we all know, if we are all in the workforce or as a students, we all know that December is more or less a wasted month, because A, you don't work, B, we spend a lot of time on planning for the holiday, actually enjoying the holiday. And so I think when the year actually arrives in December, it's a bit too late to think that, oh, hang on, I haven't done this, I haven't done that. But, well, you got the rest of the year to actually rest and reflect a bit. But I hope we've been winning a lot throughout this year, which is, I think, one of the topics that struck me really hard when I reread the subtitle of it. Well, not the sub, yeah. If you look at the notes, it's a parable of three servants. I know you all probably say, yeah, no, I've listened to these stories for thousands times, or maybe millions times, depending how long you've been Christians or how long you've read the Bible. But I hope today I can bring something that's a bit refreshing, and then we all can learn something from the Word of God. With that, I would like to maybe share one thing first. As you all know, I got two daughters. They, because they're of different age, the rules and the strictness I apply to them differ. So, as usual, the youngest one will get a bit more lenient, a bit less strict. She can get away with most things. But then the eldest one is a bit more strict, and then, because, they are at that age where you want to direct them to be independent, know what's right and wrong, know what to act, not just running around like, they are 5 years old or 6 years old, because nobody wants to see a baby in the adult's body. And so the thing that I constantly get from my kids is, hey, Dad, that's unfair. Yeah, this is the thing that we always compare, yeah? And then, so if one day the eldest one got something, maybe she got to go to her friend's birthday party, the youngest one will go, hey, I had my friend's birthday party last week, and my eldest sister came. Why can't I go to her friend's birthday party? It's like, no, you can't, because they, because they're on a bit of a different age gap, and then naturally their party will be different. And so I constantly get say, hey, that's unfair. And then I thought it just came from the little one. It turns out it also comes from the eldest one as well. So I go like, hey, come on, grow up. But then the more I reflect to our lives, complaining life is unfair also happens to us. Because I sometimes complain as well. If you all know, I've often share about some of the complaints I've got at my workplace. And I go, why is, there are a few people up there that, they got all the perks, all the bonus, all the credits, but they feel like they don't do anything. Life is unfair. Like, hey, I do a lot of work, tough work too. I do a lot of overtime too. Why don't I get any of those? Life is unfair. But as it turns out, this unfair is actually biblical. Now, before we jump to that, let's open our Bible. Our our readings today comes from Matthew 25, 15 to 30. Now, let me read it out to all of you, and hopefully I can bring up my... All right. This is the story of the three servants with the talents, or if we read the translations of the Bible I'm going to read today comes from New International Versions, and it translates a talent into a bag of gold. And you probably know the context. A talent is not cheap. It probably amounts to about a few years of one salary back then. So it's a lot of money. Matthew 25, verse 15. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, and to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag. It's according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. Verse 19. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. So if you're all accountants, this makes a lot of sense. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I've gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things, and I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. And so his master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on the deposit with the bankers, so that when I return, I would have received it with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Yeah, so parable of talents. Each one of us get our own talents. There are 5. There are got more. There are some who got less, and there are some who just got 1. The one that I want to point out about this unfair distributions law or pattern is in the verse, hang on, where is that? Verse 29. And so this one actually says, for whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. And whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. So, have we as Christians, do we feel comfortable teaching this to other people in the world? Feels odd, yeah? It's like, hang on, didn't our God teach that, for those who don't have, we need to give? Like in the other chapters of Matthew, he said, if you find your neighbors hungry, give them food. If you found them naked, give them clothes. Or if they found, unsheltered, maybe give them something to help them out. So for what you've done to your needy neighbors, you've done it unto me. And so this feels like a contradicting to what God's teachings on the other parts of the gospel. But as it turns out, this is actually a natural law. Now, if we go, there is this still called Pareto's principle. Now, if we are in the workforce, we've probably known that this is what we call the 80-20 rule. Yeah. This principle is coined by an Italian guy. He is a sociologist, civil engineer, and economist all at the same time. So he's actually a smart guy. He lives, or actually I should say, he died 1923. So it's a long time ago. His name is Vilfredo Pareto, and obviously this principle actually named after him. Now what he said is, hang on, why can't I see my screen? Okay, 80% of outcomes are due to 20% of causes. And if we actually apply this to our workforce, our natural, not natural, our daily life, it means that what we do for 20% is actually gain us the 80% of what we want to get. And so this helps us with what we call priority. We don't have all the time in the world, we don't have all the resources in the world, and so we can only do so much, and we better make sure that what we do counted, right? We don't want to waste time doing things for just 10% of the outcome. Now what Pareto's realized is that this rule is also applicable to the distribution of wealth in the world. Yeah, and this distribution of the wealth in the world is true for the years of the early 20th century, and it appears to be applied to every society ever studied, regardless of the government's form. So you can be communist, you can be capitalist, you can be Commonwealth, whatever. This law holds true, that only a few people at the top holds all the wealth of the world, and they have more than the 80% of the people at the bottom. Yeah. Unfair distribution. So in math, we probably learn about normal distributions, whatever. This is just life. This is unfair distributions. And in 1963, someone called Derek de Solla Price discovered these law applications in science. Now, this is what he finds. This is very interesting. 50% of the work, and this is his law, 50% of the work is done by the square root of the total number of people who participate in the work. Do you get what it means? So, if we put it in numbers, if we have a work worth 100 points, yeah, just for quantitative value, if we assign 100 person to do this 100 points of work, guess what? 50 points will be achieved by 10 people out of that hundreds. Yes? And for some of us who's actually been in the uni projects, school projects, we know what that means, yeah? There's always that one guy who turns up on the last day. Okay, what do you need to do? It's like, dude, this project lasts for 3 months. You never showed up in any of our meetings. Now you suddenly came, it's like, okay, what do I need to do? Come on. But this is true. Yeah. The top few will actually produce more than the rest of it. Again, if we think that this is a bit, hang on, does that mean that if we talk about 100 people, the square root of 100 is 10. That means 90 other people is useless, right? So, because 50% of the work is achieved by only the 10 people that you actually do. And so, life is unfair. And if we wonder why only the top few people always got the majority of it, well, this is the rule of the law. And turns out, in psychology space, there is also the rule they call the Matthew principle, which is applied to this. It's the same thing that we read this before. It's Matthew 25, verse 29, because who has more will be given, so they can have in abundance. And those who has less, everything will be taken from them. And so this, surprisingly, Bible knows about this ages ago, just thousands of years ago. Now, of course, this sort of comes in, what does it have anything to do with winning? Now, if we see the top 10%, or the top performers in the world, they are the ones that actually get reward. And so naturally, it makes sense there's only the few top performers in whatever society we do gets all the wealth. Yeah. So if we are the top performers in our team, you'll get the bonus, you'll get the perks, you get the extra treatments by your seniors and whatnot. And so natural law kind of means that of course you'll get more. Now, of course, there is the other side of the world, which is the bottom 80%, or if you follow the 80-20 rules, the top 20 is good, the bottom 80 is what we call the losers, because technically they are not winning. And this is the part that, I want to talk about winning and losing, not just from the perspective of our work or, our performance in our workspace, but winning and losing happens all the time in our life. Yeah. And if we think about it, if we think why life is so hard, it's because we win 20% of the time, and we'll probably lose for the 80% of the time. Yeah. How many times have we struggled before we actually achieve that trophy? How many times we practice and we be defeated if we do in sports before we actually come out as a winner and win that trophy at the top? We probably fail more than the number of times we succeed, right? Thomas Edison knows this as well, because he tried so many times and end up with so many failures before he ends up with one working light bulb. So the rule is there, and this is sort of natural. And what we want to learn today is something that we should be aware of about when we are losing. Again, the 80-20, if we are at the bottom 20, and again, I use a lot of example from the workforce because this is sort of easy for us to see. But the context actually surrounds our lives in actually winning or losing. If we're actually at the bottom 80% that don't perform well in our company, you know what it means, right? First, I'm not saying, it's possible that this bottom 80% of the people actually put a lot of effort as well into their work. It's not like the top 20 actually, spend more. Maybe, but not all the time. Sometimes the people at the bottom spend more, but they don't get that acknowledgement. And so they quite often feels left out. And when they don't feel they feel left out, they don't feel acknowledged. People actually feels like they're deflated. They're losing. It's like, why? Whatever I've done is not being acknowledged. And so, where's my reward? When we get this mentality, it's actually, or get into this state of environmental, it's really a bit dangerous. Because it's also a kind to feeling being defeated, yeah? I don't know, Josh, you've been in the basketball match, yeah? Did you win or did you lose? You lost. What does it feel like? You're not gonna walk out of the stadium with your head held up high, right? Hey, I lost. No, you're gonna go like, I lost. I haven't done good enough, right? And so this is something that we want to learn. And again, if we look from the manager's perspective, just imagine instead of the worst performing employer, you are the manager and you realize this law about 80-20, and the 50% of the work is actually done achieved by only 10 people out of 100 people in your team. What will you do as the manager? You wonder, why do I need to pay all these 90 people in our team to do the rest of the 50? Now, and so you can actually get to a very ugly state. Now, let's go back to, actually before I go to that one, let's go back to the story of the three servants. We talk about the values being offered by the workers, and then in our Christian faith, this is also true. Yeah, we came to Christ. God gave us values, right? We've talked about this, that the price of our lives is not what we think it is. It's what someone else thinks it is. In our case, God thinks we are worth the cross. And so when we come to Christ, God gives us this value in our lives. And so when we think about it, the values we offer to Christ is actually a lot, and I mean a lot, significant. So this is something that I realized in the parable of the three servants about values that the servants get. Now, of course, one got 5, one got 2, one got 1. We've always been taught, yeah, the 5 one went all out, give all his best, and so the one with 2 talents or 2 bags of gold, and then they got rewarded. And the reward doesn't matter because God gives us the chance to actually work, and God will actually make it successful. That's true, very true. But now let's take a look at from the servant's side. Now this parable has always been linked to financial investment. Metaphorically speaking, it's not always financial, right? When we invest something in our God, it could be our time, could be our resource, could be our energy, could be our lives. It could also be financial, but nonetheless, it is an investment that we have to make. If we take a step back and look at these 3 servants, one got 5. One got 2, one got 1. Yes? The one that has 5 can try an investment and fail probably 4 times before he end up with just 1. And then say, oh, crap, what do I have to do now? Yeah? Actually, this reminds me of the movie Jumanji. My kid loves it so much, we've watched it for 20 or 30 times at home. But what kind of strikes me is that, the story Jumanji, yeah? So you got a real characters in our world that got transformed or transported to a video games world. And then in that video games world, they got 3 lives. So they got 3 bars in their hands to say, this is the 3 lives you get. So instead of just 1, they got 3 lives. And I love how everyone was cocky at the first 2 lives of their chances, right? And then when they die, they got revived because it's a video game. You got 3 lives or 7, like in Super Mario. And then when they're down to the last life, they always go, hang on, maybe I should think a bit more careful about my next action instead of just rushing through to the enemies or barrels of fire and then I die again. Because we are afraid of finding out what happens when we lost our last life. Or they actually have afraid of that. Now, naturally, the servant with 5 talents or 5 bags of gold has more buffer for his failure. It's the same thing with the servant with 2 talents. Well, at least he got 1 chance to get it wrong, and then he probably can learn from his mistake and go back and redo it and learn from his mistake and move on. Now, let's take the perspective of the servant with 1 talent. How much buffer do we think he has? None, right? It's a do or die scenario for him. You either do and get it right, or you go broke. and that's why when we read on the Bible, the reaction of the servant say, Master, I am afraid. I am afraid. Right? Because I got everything to lose. Everything. I don't have any chance to make mistakes. I don't know if I'm going to succeed or not, because we know all in investments entails some risks that you may not get what your investment back. And so if we take on a very human look at this 3rd servant, he is afraid. And that's what he says in the Bible. Master, I am afraid. And so I dug out a hole and then put your money in there and to hide it. This makes sense, right? Would we not do the same? When we got a chance to just do or die, what will we do? It takes a lot of courage, right? Yes. And if we notice what the servant does, it actually resembles a lot of a people, or in animal kingdom as well, about fear. When an ostrich has a lot of fear or afraid, what does he do? He dug a hole and put his head on the hole or in the hole, right? The body is still out there, so if there is a predator, he'll still die, but he still at least not see how he died. Same thing with the servant. He dug a hole as well, and he hid the money, right? It's an action born out of fear. And it makes sense. We might have experienced this ourselves. When we fear of something that will happen, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's maybe we're in different stages of our lives. We fear of our exams. We fear of the new opportunities that's coming in, what the future will bring. When we so afraid that we fear to do anything, we will withdraw. Right? And exactly what this servant does. We will withdraw. And the part that actually is very toxic about this is it can get into a downward spiral where we go, I don't know what to do with that, so I'll withdraw. When you withdraw, we don't look for help, right? When we don't look for help, we get plunged even deeper and say, ooh, I don't even know what am I supposed to do now with my life. And the thought gets darker, and this is when things can get really ugly in one's life with depressions, mental health and whatnot. Look, I'm not downplaying the effect of mental health and the struggle that one has to overcome it. I know it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, but what I'm saying is this is where it starts. When we actually fear and we actually withdraw and we don't want to look for the right things to do, we're going to get depressed, we're going to get stressed, and so on and so on. And now again, if we link it back to that 80-20 rules, once the manager or the senior of the company says, hey, I've identified a cost savings that we can do in our organizations, which usually means job cuts, right? Guess who will be the first to stress about? You think it will be the top 20 people that actually, I've won awards, I've done so much, I've been acknowledged? They're not going to be afraid. The one that will strike fear first is the bottom manager and go, oh, hang on, it might be my turn to get the blue folder or get out of this, and I will lose my job. And so, fear is a constant thing that will happen in our lives. And this fear and the feeling of losing the battle will always happen. We don't, like we talk about, we don't always stand on top of the world. We don't always win. Sometimes we lose. But what we can learn from fear is, first, we need to recognize it and let it not cripple us. Yeah. So that's the first one. The servant that's afraid. And the second one, what I want to talk about is, now that we know this fear or this losing battle that we get in our lives, what can we do about it? This one I'd say taking control. Again, I know this is not a small feat, fighting your fear. Everyone says fear is not something you run away from, but something that you have to conquer, which is true, because the more you run away from it, the more it leads you to the darker path. And it's sort of like sin. I know fear and sin are two different things, but they are akin in what it can lead you to. Because in sin, once you sin, you have to commit another sins to cover it up. And the more you sin, the more you have to cover up, right? And this is why David is called by God a man after his own heart, is because when God says, David, you sin, his next reaction is not to run away and hide and cover his past sin with more sin, but he comes in repentance. This is something that we need to remember. But taking David's example, he is taking control of his loss. Maybe a story about taking control, whether it's something that's very interesting in the workplace study, because this is sort of kind of link. How often, or how many of us thinks that the more we progress up the company ladder, the more stress and depressed we're going to get, because we have to deal with people, we have to deal with more work, we have to deal with more office politics. In general, it's more crap we have to deal with. Yeah, and so we kind of think, maybe I shouldn't be up there. I just want to be comfortable and stay where I am because I got a sort of manageable workload. I'm not so stressed and whatnot. We thought about this before? I know I have. And for those of you, like Toby, Talia, and Josie, or Christopher, who hasn't been in the workforce, let me tell you, this is a myth. There is a study called the Whitehall Studies, and it's done by scientists in Britain, presumably to help those in the higher ladder of the company to battle stress and depression, right? Because if a CEO of a big company got depressed and stressed and suddenly die of a heart stroke, we're not surprised because, well, maybe his job is too hard and whatnot. Now, what this study finds is that they study, so the study actually applies to a government employee because in government employees, everyone got a bit of a equal benefit, so it's less variable in the studies to be concerned with or for them to measure. So they want to compare the health and mortality rate of people to their pay grade. Yeah. Guess what they found out? The people in the top 20, or the higher your rank in the company goes up, the lower your mortality rate is. And so it goes, the lower your pay grade is, the higher your mortality rate is. Yeah? Meaning, the second study comes in, and it actually affirms this theory, and it says, the lower your pay grade is, the higher your stress and your anxiety is. Because at the bottom 80, nothing is certain. You don't know what will happen to you. In short, you don't have control of what happens to you. The higher up actually has control over what he wants to do, over what he can do, and he or they even have controls over their subordinates. And so having controls actually attributes to less stress and less anxiety. It's not about more work. It's not about the amount of work we have to do. It's not the amount of responsibility we have to do that contributes to our stress and anxiety, but it's the amount of control we can take in our lives. Yeah, it's very surprising. And so when we are faced with fear, what we need to do to get out of the stress and anxiety is we have to take control of it. Now, this is something that, talking about winning, in God or as a Christian, of course, taking control doesn't mean we go and write and do it in the worldly way. But we need to go back to our root as a Christians and think, what can I do as a Christian from the Christian's perspective or Christian lens to actually take control of my loss, my fear, and everything that kind of comes with it. What I found is, and again, this is from what Lukman and Chipto had preached in the past as well. The first thing is always about being in gratitude towards God. We know God commanded the Israelites to actually celebrate what we call Thanksgiving. Yeah. Thanksgiving is a celebration to remind them of themselves that God actually delivered them from the land of Egypt or from the death, and into freedom, into the promised land. And this happens, BCE, thousands of years ago. But then the Jews and the Israelites still celebrate something called Thanksgiving. And so do we as Christians, because we want to remember what God has done for us in the past in our lives. And gratitude is actually something that can lift up our spirituality, because we know that God hasn't forsaken us all through this year. Death is probably one of the worst things that could happen in our lives, right? But God delivered us from it. And so we celebrate this Thanksgiving because we owe our gratitude towards God. And now this parable surprisingly affirms the same. The servant with 1 talent has 1 talent to be gratitude of, right? He has 1 talent. It's not like God has the 3rd servant and he gave him 0 talent. Well, in that case, he has every right to be afraid and run away. But no, as far as we're concerned, every one of us has something that God has provided us with. In other words, if we want to apply this to workplace, each one of us is actually good at something. We have that capacity to be good at something. I'm not saying everyone is good at everything, but at least the contrary is true, that every one of us is at least good at something. And the Bible says so as well. Yeah. First is gratitude, about taking control. And the second one is what I would like to sum up as being accountable. Now, if you go back to the Bible or the verse that we just read today, in the verse 26, the verse 26 is when the master replied, "You wicked lazy servant, so you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed." Yeah. So then you should have put my money on deposit with bankers. And so more than just a rebuttal, this sentence actually says, so you know who I am. That's what the master says to the servant. You know who I am. If we know who our God is, then why don't we act accordingly? Sometimes the fear cripples us so much that we forget who our God is. And this is the root of taking control of our losses and our fear, is by remembering who our God is. God is the one that deemed your life worth the cross. God is the one that says, you have talents. God gives values to our lives. And God says, I've conquered death so that we may live. If God can conquer one thing that we cannot in our lives, then why is these lesser things can conquer us? Yeah. So being accountable is composed of two parts, really. The first is remembering who our God is. And the second thing is to act accordingly. Now that we remember who our God is and know who our God is, why don't we act like we know our God? Exactly the problem with this servant is that you knew I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you know how I act or who I am and what I will do. But then why don't you put your money in the deposit with the bankers, right? Since you know who I am, why don't you act like you know me? You act like I can't do anything. We act like God cannot save us from this loss or this fear and move on. And this is what God hates, right? We know our God, but we don't act accordingly. And so the part of being in control or taking control of our fear is this, knowing who our God is and act accordingly. Now, I want to attribute one thing to this, going back to that knowing our God and start offering value. So maybe I'll jump a bit. Just remember, the point of that 80-20 rules, that 20% of the people actually contribute the majority of the outcomes, is that it's not to be in the minority of the group. The point is we need to offer values. Yeah. And we want to offer values, now that we remember that God has us values. Sometimes our values are still raw. Maybe our talents are still raw. What we need is patience. We don't suddenly become good at something. We need practice. Yes? It's the same thing that people say, if you do the same thing over and over again and expect something to change, it's madness. But I would argue it's also what we call practice. You do the same thing over and over again until you can do it better. In other words, something's changed, right? But we need this practice and we need time. We need patience. Don't be frustrated if tomorrow we still feel deflated and we still feel lost. Just hang on, okay? We all need time. We don't have the magic lamp where we're up and there's a genie came out and say, hey, I got you 3 wishes. We would have wasted the 3 wishes anyway. All right? Be patient. Now that's fear and taking control of it. Now, talking about loss, um, just losing is not good. People that constantly lose will one day wonder, why am I even doing this? Right? I'll take example with Josh and his basketball player. This is just example, and it's hypothetical, yeah. So don't treat it as the real one. If we play basketball for 5 years and you always lost, there is no winning track records, what will you think? Will we think, I'm so good at this, I'm just gonna try it again? Or we kind of go, maybe this is not the right spot for me. Maybe this is not the right work, a job for me to do, right? And so constantly losing is not good because it will lead you to quitting. But this is the last things. We are biologically built to win. Yeah? Again, from the theology, if our God conquers death, our God is a winner. And we build according in our God's image, then we are built to win. And so losing is not a good thing. I'm not saying don't lose at all, right? We will lose, but don't let it cripple you. Losing is part of life. But what we need to do is we need to go and win because we are built to win. Now, this is biologically proven as well because as it turns out, in our body, we have this chemical called serotonin. And this chemical is responsible for us feeling proud when we achieve something. Yeah, when we walk out down that graduation aisle, when we've done all our courses and everything, we've achieved our credits, we fulfill our 4 years, we've done our assignments, we pass all of them. You'll get this piece of scroll or paper or whatever. It says, yes, you are now deemed a bachelor, a master, PhD, whatever. This is your reward. And when we walk down that stage, when we receive these rewards, it feels very proud, right? Or if you've worked so hard in your sports or in something else, in your math, in our special skill in our workload, and then we achieve that rank, they say, hey, you've passed, or you've been acknowledged, say, hey, yes, you've done a very good job. This is your reward. We feel very proud, yes? As it turns out, this pride feeling is triggered by a chemical called serotonin. And it is responsible for that proud feeling because we are recognized by our peers. Yeah, serotonin. And now, the thing is, this serotonin is reciprocal as well. So when we feel that pride stand up with our cups, our acknowledgements, or whatever it is, the people on the side of the in the audience side actually has a boost of serotonin. This is usually dealt with people who has contributed a lot to your success, like our parents, our coach, our team members, or our friends, our closest siblings, or whatnot. And it wonders little why every speech of people who stand up on the stage receiving awards is more or less the same, right? We thank our parents, we thank our friends, our coaches, our colleagues, or our God, if he realizes it. Because these are the people who have put effort and their support so that this one guy can achieve this acknowledgement. And when that serotonin boost shoots up in the winner, the supporter gets a boost of serotonin as well. Now, why this is important? This is actually what gives us the feeling that when we fight, we press, we cannot lose. Why? Because we have our parents, our God, our friends, who have put a lot of us in our life, a lot of their things or their efforts into our lives so that we can actually win this, to put us here. And so we feel accountable, we feel responsible, not to just run the race, but to actually win the race. And this is what Paul says about him running the race and winning it. He practiced hard because there is a sense of accountability to the God that we believe, who has deemed us worthy and has put a lot of sacrifice so that we may live. And this is the part that, makes us responsible for winning and makes us accountable. And now, I want to share something, and this just happens in in our ministry a couple of maybe some few years ago, when we still have these August celebrations and we go, oh, there's a lot of things to plan, there's a lot of things to do, we still has to practice, we don't have enough time, the performance or the event is going to be next week or next month. If we plan our schedule, it's not going to meet. And I know a few of us who has been in this ministry kind of feels like, I don't think we can do it. We can't and we cannot do it. And so there's some point of time where at some stage, when I felt that feeling of, I can't do this, there is just no light at the end of the tunnel, I can't see it. There's these feelings of say, but hang on, we do this for God who has put a lot of sacrifices in our lives. This is for the God that we love, the God that we follow. I cannot fail. And so I thought this feeling is personal to me because I feel indebted or gratitude towards our God and I want to press on. And so I kind of make it as a, every time, and because we do this celebration year by year by year, it kind of get ingrained to me and say, it's okay. We see everything doesn't stack up, but we will press on because we know we cannot fail. There's a sense of accountability and responsibility to our God. Again, I thought this is personal, but towards the last few years until the last time we did our celebrations, I actually realized some of our friends actually said the same thing. I know Christine Kiwi, if you remember, and I know my brother says it too. It's like, oh, I can't do this. I know my brother said this during our celebrations when we filmed that feature-length movie. The last editing hours is just depressing because you usually got about a month or 2 months to edit an hour long film. In our case, we got 4 days. And I was like, there's no way I can do this. No way. And I sort of thought, God, maybe this is the wrong things to press on. This is not the right thing. But then he came up and said, but hey, we can't fail. We cannot fail. We cannot. It's not an option. And that's sort of like a moral boost to me. It's like, yes, this is what affirms me that this feels of accountability and responsibility is not just me. It's because God is in us and God is the one that we feel accountable for because he has done a lot for us. Yeah. This is the winning chemical in our body, serotonin. Now, the inverse of this, the downside of this is, if we see the lack of serotonin in our body will trigger or have these downside effects. The first is depression, second is anxiety, schizophrenia, dementia, and even OCD. So there's a lot of bad side effects if we don't have these serotonin chemicals in our body. Because when we stress, there is another chemical called cortisol that shoots up in our body, makes whole our body aware of the, full-on emergency alert mode that we have to be worried about everything surrounding us. This cortisol is meant to avoid danger in our lives, but it's not meant to be constantly on. And so serotonin is one of the chemicals that actually press the amount of cortisol chemical happening in our body. And so it's good, right? We don't want to have a lot of cortisol in our lives. Maybe every now and then we can, but for majority of part, we want this serotonin. We technically are built to win because when we lose, when we lose this serotonin, actually, the serotonin level shoots down. And when it shoots down, it comes a lot with bad effects. The one that probably could lead to suicide or death. And so we biologically built to win. Yeah? So this is actually a magic thing. And when we win, let's think back about that verse that says, for those who has, more will be given to them, and so they will have it in abundance. As we win, we gain confidence. And when we gain confidence, we actually has that feeling that says, we can do more. I can do this. And when we achieve that results, when we can do more, people will notice. Yeah, people will notice that this guy has confidence, or this girl can do her part. Everything is good, and so naturally, by the law, people will gravitate towards you and say, "Hey, this is more for you to take care of, because I can see your confidence. You can do it. You've successfully achieved this." And so it makes sense. When we win, we gain more. But when we lose, everything from us will be taken away. And sometimes not just by God. Sometimes it's by the law, and sometimes by ourselves. That's the law. And so, again, I want to encourage us to think that, again, I'm not saying don't lose, because, we will lose one in our lives. And for the better part of it, we will lose more time than we actually win. But don't let that feeling of loss and fear conquer us. Yeah, we are built to win. If we are built in the image of God, who actually conquers death again, He is a winner. And so why aren't we try to win for the majority part of our lives? And so with that, I hope it's a blessing. I hope this is something new we can learn. And let's close in prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you today that you reveal to us a small part of your grand design in our lives. A part that says that we are created in your image, and that you want us to win wherever we go, because we walk with you, because you have deemed us worthy. You've deemed us our values, and that is the cross and your blood, your sacrifice. And so, Father, we pray that may our newfound life in you is not wasted because we feel lost, we feel fear, we retract ourselves from where you want us to be. We withdraw ourselves from our community. We withdraw ourselves even from you because we feel lost. We don't see where you are when we suffer our losses. But we pray, God, when one of these thoughts comes to our lives, comes to our mind, we pray that we may remember who our God is, and we act accordingly. We don't surrender to our fear. We don't surrender to the feeling of depression because we lost. But in our loss, may we remember who you are, and we can pick ourselves back up so that we can win, get back to the race and win it. Because I know you are a God who wins, who conquers death for us. You're a God who has won every battle, who's bigger than every single thing that could actually come our ways. So let us believe in you. Let us put our strength in you. And let us not be conquered by what may come, by our adversities that may come in our lives. But all of this may come to us, and we can stand our ground because you are with us. Thank you once again, God. Thank you. You built us according to your image. And we pray, God, may these realizations grow in our hearts, and may our lives bear the fruits of the spirits that please your hearts. Thank you, Jesus, and in your name we've prayed.